The tale begins with a group of people, armed and encircling a guy in black armor. Our hero declared that it was the finale. A wizard said some magic words for fire. An archer aimed an arrow. The hero then swung his sword at the black-armored man. Various attacks came his way, but the black-armored guy sliced through everything. A priestess prayed and blessed the hero. He attempted another attack, and the black-armored man realized he couldn't dodge in time. He just took the hit and got blown away, wondering if this was the end. After a while, the hurt man could hear the voices of his attackers. Surprisingly, the guy, known as the Demon King, couldn't believe he was still kicking. The hero stood there, looking good, and the Demon King couldn't help but get angry. The hero listed Zeke's evil deeds before finishing him off. Zeke had killed many knights and innocent civilians, and he remembered doing those acts. As the hero continued talking, Zeke became bored. He accepted that he had committed numerous crimes, but hearing them recounted by the hero annoyed him. Despite regretting dying in a lame manner, Zeke was glad to still have the fate-twisting key. He planned to use it to stab the hero, hoping to change the future, although he wasn't sure how it would turn out. With the key in hand, Zeke intended to alter his destiny. However, the hero swung his sword, expressing a wish for Zeke to live a better life in his next incarnation. Blood splattered, and Zeke realized his plan wouldn't succeed this time. He declared that he still had things to do and flicked the hero with the finger holding the key. The hero's armor broke, and something entered his heart. Wondering why Zeke possessed the key, the hero became angry, and Zeke was pleased to see him get upset. In a fit of rage, the hero swung his sword again, ultimately beheading Zeke. Surprisingly, Zeke had no regrets about dying earlier than expected. As he heard the hero saying something, Zeke's consciousness faded away to nothing. In a different time and place, the birds used to chirp loudly every morning. One day, a young-looking Zeke woke up to their noisy tunes. Confused, he took a moment to figure out what was happening. It dawned on him that something unusual had occurred. He had somehow traveled back in time. Memories of his defeat and the hero's triumphant words flooded back, making him wonder if it had something to do with the fate-twisting key. Strangely, he couldn't recall where he had obtained the key. Realizing he was back in a time when he lived with his family, Zeke decided to search for the key. However, he couldn't remember why he had left his family in his previous life. Just then, an unfamiliar and impolite servant burst into his room, questioning Zeke's early morning outings. Zeke, feeling irritated, asked the servant to come closer. After a moment of intense staring, Zeke unexpectedly punched the servant, who stumbled backward in surprise. As the servant tried to express his anger, Zeke's ominous demeanor made him retreat in fear. Tripping over himself, the servant found himself being kicked by Zeke multiple times. Begging for forgiveness, the servant's plea caught the attention of another person entering the room. This newcomer inquired about the commotion, prompting the servant to quickly seek refuge behind an armored man named Biner. Zeke noticed that Biner was also quite rude. Sighing, Zeke and Biner exchanged impolite words. Wondering if Biner had the right to address him like that, Zeke suggested that sometimes a dog needs discipline when it doesn't recognize its owner. Biner, uncertain about facing a potential beating, reluctantly agreed. Biner had asserted that Zeke couldn't defeat him, but Zeke reminded him that he was the master responsible for training his dog. Offended, Biner attempted to confront Zeke once more, but he was met with a piece of cloth, and Zeke attacked him from behind with a pot. Biner's head was smashed, and he fell unconscious. Zeke then shifted his focus to the impolite servant to complete what he had started. Shortly after, Zeke stood in front of a door that had frightened him in his earlier life. However, he didn't care this time. He opened the door and found a man sitting at an office table, surrounded by others. Biner was there, glaring at Zeke. A few minutes earlier, Greg, Zeke's stepbrother, had labeled Biner as a disgrace to the Steelwell Knights for losing consciousness. He advised Biner to be confident since he hadn't done anything wrong, considering his opponent was someone like Zeke. Zeke's father, Count Vordo, declared that Zeke was late. Zeke wondered why he was summoned, and Vordo became angry, noting that Zeke had forgotten how to greet people. Zeke didn't comply, deeming it useless. Vordo reminded him to adjust his attitude, as he was the main heir to the position of Count. Zeke couldn't help but sigh, knowing that Vordo would not easily relinquish it to him. Vordo became annoyed, but Zeke's stepmother, Florel, reminded him that Zeke had a tendency to be ill-mannered. Zeke recalled how his stepmother and stepbrother had tried to harm him before. Despite claiming he wasn't disrespectful, Zeke greeted them sarcastically. This angered Florel. Zeke thanked them for the visit, apologized to his father, and grabbed a nearby decorative sword. Shocked, everyone watched as Zeke pointed the sharp blade at the rude servant, Hans. Hans, desperate for help, tried to speak up. Vordo was furious that Zeke dared to threaten someone in front of him. Zeke justified it by saying he was eliminating someone who humiliated the main heir. Florel defended Hans, and Zeke questioned if she was lying. Afraid of the consequences, Hans stayed silent. Zeke couldn't understand why Florel was going to such lengths for a servant. Bina intervened, accusing Zeke of lying and even claiming assault. Zeke questioned why a knight like Bina couldn't handle being ambushed and saw through his lack of confession. Bina denied Zeke's claims, and Zeke challenged him to prove his skills instead of just talking. Vordo agreed to a duel. Bina was eager, but Zeke was even more thrilled, urging his father to decide the time and place. Originally planning to scold Zeke, Vordo found an excuse to pass the Count title to Greg. Zeke stated that he wanted to start changing and hinted at desires beyond the Count title. Vordo inquired about it, but Zeke didn't provide a clear answer. Zeke announced he would see them on the day of the duel. As an 18-year-old boy again, Zeke realized how weak he had become. He hadn't learned swordsmanship because his father was reluctant to teach him. In his past life, Zeke was unaware of the great and destructive power lying dormant within him. While mana is usually innate, Zeke's mana behaved differently. When he stabbed the ground, he unintentionally released mana, causing an explosive reaction. Recreating something he had done as the Demon King was overwhelming, and he knew the dragon's mana wouldn't appear immediately. Despite having been a Demon King, Zeke remembered the hardships he faced, making him question if his life was scripted. Zeke picked himself up and called out to someone in hiding. Grieg emerged, acting surprised to witness Zeke's awakened mana. Grieg discussed the duel and the Count title, questioning why Zeke was getting involved in unnecessary matters. He advised Zeke to live a quiet life and offered to take care of him. Zeke glared at him, noting Greg's fear that the coveted Count title might slip through his grasp. Greg refuted Zeke's claim, stating that he would only concede if he couldn't defeat the seemingly inept Zeke Steelwill. Zeke, seizing Greg's shoulder, asserted that he would indeed take the Count title after defeating him. Greg dismissed Zeke as insane for proposing a duel, to which Zeke confirmed that was precisely what he meant. Greg, finding no reason to refuse, agreed, and Zeke, content, declared that he would decide on the time and place. Shortly thereafter, in the middle of an arena, Bina attempted to lecture Zeke before their duel, but Zeke paid no attention. A knight officiated the duel, and both Bina and Zeke confirmed their readiness. The duel commenced, and the two combatants charged at each other. Bina swung forcefully, but Zeke skillfully blocked the attack. Bina's assumptions were accurate, and he began to unleash attacks with his aura sword. Zeke found himself pushed back, and Bina seized the opportunity to launch a more powerful assault. The crowd cheered loudly as Zeke fought against Bina. Even though Zeke was having a tough time, the butler could see his potential because he managed to block Bina's attacks. Florel argued that they were still at a disadvantage, but the butler pointed out that Zeke hadn't properly studied swordsmanship. Vordo quietly observed the scene. The audience continued to support Bina, and the knight taunted Zeke, claiming everyone was on his side. Bina suggested Zeke surrender, but Zeke dismissed him as a joke and unleashed a sword aura, insisting he was just getting started. However, Zeke wasn't sure if his plan would succeed. Biner was surprised when Zeke launched an unexpected attack, managing to block and dodge the shots. Zeke, sensing his hand trembling, realized he still couldn't control his mana properly. The crowd fell silent, witnessing something unusual. The butler was astonished to see Zeke use a skill that enhanced one's senses by aligning the sword and body through mana. He was shocked that Zeke seemed natural at executing it. Biner, though surprised, could see that Zeke was still struggling. He reminded himself that his opponent was the seemingly useless Zeke and decided to take the fight seriously. Biner had used up his mana to unleash a skill, but surprisingly Zeke dodged it. However, the attack wasn't over, and Biner continued with another skill. Zeke couldn't evade this one and was blown toward the wall. Seeing Zeke on the ground, everyone cheered for Biner. The knight flexed, clearly thinking he was the victor. Loud cheers echoed in the arena, but Zeke still got up. He might not win with his current body's techniques, but in battles, he vowed to fight for real. Zeke charged toward Biner with his sword, slashing the ground to blind the knight with sand. Zeke tackled him to the ground. The knight called Zeke a coward. Although he couldn't see things clearly, Zeke's sword was already pointed at his neck. Zeke couldn't believe Biner was using such excuses to justify his defeat. Biner received an ominous glare from Zeke and announced his surrender. Zeke then lectured Biner about his recklessness and arrogance that led to his defeat. Zeke claimed Biner could still grow if he learned from their duel. Everyone was speechless at the outcome, and the officiating knight announced Zeke as the winner. Despite being called a coward for using cheap tricks, Zeke didn't care as long as he won. Vordo wondered how Zeke learned magic techniques when no one was there to teach him. The butler then claimed that Zeke was born with it. Greed couldn't help but get mad and doubted how Zeke survived Biner's fatal attack. Suddenly, Zeke challenged Greed to a duel and reminded him about their agreement. Vordo wondered what Zeke was doing, and Zeke asked his father to stop acting oblivious since he knew their duel would happen. Everyone then talked about who would get to inherit the title, but they doubted Zeke would win with his current condition. Zeke then called out Grieg again and wondered if he was scared. Vordo then ordered Grieg to go down to the arena to stop disgracing himself. Grieg went down and wondered why Zeke was smiling. Seeing his demeanor and combat skills, he knew Zeke was not the same person he knew. Zeke then mocked him by asking if he would just play defense. Zeke offered to go first since he was the elder brother. Grieg blocked the attack while being flustered and felt that Zeke was not exerting any effort at all. He assumed that Zeke was still the same weak Zeke and went for the offense while thinking about the Count title. Zeke was taken aback since he could still feel the backlash of receiving Biner's attack. Zeke then decided to end the fight with his victory. He laughed, and blood started pouring to the ground. Zeke grabbed tightly onto Grieg's sword and asked him if he ever witnessed a bloody fight with flesh flying everywhere. He had used his last bit of magical energy to snap Grieg's sword with just his hands. Grieg was surprised. Covered in blood, Zeke warned Grieg that he would die if he didn't give up. Using the sword's hilt, Zeke struck Grieg, knocking him to the ground. Grieg fell, and a blade stuck into the ground near his face. Zeke stood there, looking like he might harm his brother, and Grieg surrendered, feeling helpless. The knight officiating the duel declared Zeke the winner. The entire arena fell into silence. Zeke then reminded Vordo that the victor should be named the Count. Vordo argued that the duel didn't count for the family's succession. The audience couldn't believe that the esteemed Steelwell family was going back on their word, despite witnessing Zeke's 2 consecutive victories. Zeke admitted he expected this and confessed he never wanted the title in the first place. He tossed a ring at Vordo, which landed in front of him. Vordo got angry and questioned Zeke's actions. Zeke clarified that he was leaving the family willingly. He turned to Grieg and urged him to become stronger for the sake of everyone in the territory. Zeke grabbed a potion meant for Grieg and drank it all. Zeke hoped the Steelwells wouldn't forget the lessons he just taught them. Some days later, we find Zeke outside the gates with Hans as his porter. How did he become Zeke's porter? Well, Zeke ran into him while he was doing laundry and forced him to come along by making threats. Hans had no choice but to carry the heavy luggage as a way for Zeke to forgive him for being disrespectful. Zeke was actually trying to train Hans so the servant could keep up with him. He made sure Hans addressed him respectfully. When Hans asked about Zeke's plan, the former Demon King didn't have one in mind. He remembered the hero and decided to head to the territory of Porty, letting their feet take them anywhere afterward. This time, Zeke chose to live a kind life. Shortly after, Hans pointed out that the path in front of them wasn't meant for humans. Zeke agreed, saying it was to shorten the distance and travel time. Hans brought up the concern about monsters, and Zeke said that was precisely why they were taking their current path, leaving Hans confused. The sound of rustling bushes made Hans nervous. Despite his anxiety, they continued through the thick forest, and Hans couldn't shake the thought that a monster might be following them. Suddenly, Zeke stopped and handed Hans a sword, declaring that Hans' test was about to begin. He told the frightened servant to look behind him, and Hans was shocked to find out that his imagination was now a reality. It's been a while, but there was this goblin causing trouble. Hans insisted he didn't know how to use a sword and asked for a bigger one. Zeke jokingly threatened to give him a stick. The goblin growled and attacked Hans. Poor Hans couldn't defend himself and pleaded for Zeke's help. Realizing that training Hans would take too long, Zeke decided to take matters into his own hands. With one punch, he knocked out the goblin. However, Hans wasn't happy about Zeke's method and thought it was too harsh. Zeke argued that Hans needed to learn how to protect himself instead of just carrying luggage. He insisted that Hans take a potion for another round with the goblin, as it would wake up soon. After a few rounds of potions, Hans seemed more at ease facing the goblin and its creepy voice. He attempted a stab, but the goblin dodged and counterattacked. Despite defending with his arm, Hans felt the pain. The goblin repeated the attack pattern, but this time Hans managed to dodge. Zeke was surprised and started to wonder if Hans had some hidden talent. Hans swiftly moved and stabbed the goblin's head, watching it fall. He realized he had won, celebrated, and Zeke rewarded him with a potion. Zeke acknowledged that Hans had exceeded his expectations. After Hans thanked Zeke, more goblins appeared. This time, it was a horde, but Zeke seemed calm. He grabbed a few pebbles and aimed them at the goblins' foreheads. Surprisingly, each pebble hit its target, and all the goblins were defeated. Zeke assured Hans that they were just getting started. Soon after, orcs emerged from the other side, but Zeke reassured Hans that he had plenty of potions. As night fell, a pile of defeated monsters surrounded them, and Hans, exhausted, was sound asleep. Zeke reflected on his earlier conversation with Hans, where they discussed Florel favoring Zeke too much. Hans then revealed that his grandmother had been Florel's nanny. Zeke remembered his mother mistreating the grandson of Florel's nanny, Hans. It made Zeke wonder if Hans remembered his mother. Hans recalled her kindness to those beneath her and respect for those above, but in reality, she was the cause of Zeke's family hatred. Despite understanding how others felt about his mother's actions, Zeke couldn't find sympathy for them. Back then, Zeke heard a carriage approaching. He woke up Hans and told him that something was approaching. Hans quickly grabbed his sword, thinking it might be monsters. The carriage arrived, and Zeke nudged Hans forward, using him as a shield. Hans wondered if it was a merchant, but Zeke disagreed, saying it didn't sound like that. Hans thought it might be another traveler like them, but Zeke reminded him that travelers don't usually have carriages. As they pondered who might be inside, heavily armored knights emerged from the bushes. Zeke recognized them as paladins. A woman stepped out of the carriage and apologized for disturbing them. Zeke was surprised to see the woman, who introduced herself as a follower of Karna. She was Ain Livella, the saintess. Zeke had glared at her because she was part of the hero's force that had subjugated him in his previous life. Meeting her surprised him. A man named Wige introduced himself as Ain's escort, and Zeke remembered his nickname in his first life, Tanzania's killing machine. Wige was curious about what Zeke meant, but Zeke asked him not to mind his words. In his second life, Zeke had planned to live kindly and decided to get acquainted with people different from his past life. He then told everyone to make themselves comfortable. When he tried to give orders to Hans, the servant ignored him and went to introduce himself to Ain. The paladins started setting up their tent, needing someone to help hold down a part. Ain tried to assist, but Hans offered his help. Zeke couldn't help but think Hans was crazy. He agreed that Ain's beauty was top level and wondered if the hero, Green Zennard, only hired beauties as party members. Suddenly, Ain wondered if she could sit beside Zeke, and he agreed. She thanked Zeke for letting them camp with them, and Zeke was fine with it. Awkward silence followed, and Zeke broke the ice by asking why they had come. Ain explained that they traveled around to hear stories from different people and pray for them. She then asked why Zeke was out there, and he easily confessed that he was finding ways to live as a kind person. He realized that Ain was the best person to ask about it after recalling Green's words. Ain had asserted that there were numerous ways to contribute. She inquired whether Zeke had a skill, and he affirmed that he possessed strength. Ain proposed using that strength to assist those in need. Consequently, Zeke resolved to search for such individuals the following day. When morning arrived, on a city street filled with ongoing shop construction, Wige informed Ain that he needed to fulfill an order. Ain was left with the other paladins. Suddenly, she heard screams from a nearby alley. They rushed to investigate, and discovered a man being attacked. A paladin ordered the assailants to cease, and Ain realized that the aggressor was Zeke. Later, in a shop, Ain reprimanded Zeke for helping the wrong people. She then counseled him to aid the vulnerable and refrain from harming good individuals. Ain urged him to apologize, but the victim, named Sud, insisted he was fine. Sud explained that he was pressured to surrender his shop to a trading house that was bribing the mayor. Despite the shop's modest size, it held sentimental value for him. Sud endured the beating because he refused to yield. Uncertain about what to do next, Ain reassured him not to worry. Ain had decided to meet the mayor, despite a paladin's warning against getting involved in politics. However, Ain, being an upright person, couldn't turn a blind eye to what was happening. She pledged to address the issue and set out with her paladins. Zeke looked at Ain suspiciously, as if he knew something. The following day, Hans couldn't understand why Zeke seemed upset. Zeke insisted that Ain had been mistaken the day before, but Hans argued that it was Zeke who was wrong. Concerned because Ain and the paladins hadn't returned since they left, Hans's worry grew. Suddenly, a wanted poster appeared, accusing the person who supposedly killed the mayor. Zeke was shocked to see Ain's face on the poster as a murderer and witch. That night, Zeke wandered around the city, trying to remember if the same incident had happened before he regressed. Suddenly, a zombie appeared, but Zeke quickly got rid of it. Hans questioned why an undead creature showed up in the port city, and Zeke said he had a bad feeling. They reported the undead to the guards, who thanked them and warned them about the witch's curse before telling them to leave. Hans doubted if Ain was truly a witch, but Zeke disagreed, believing that someone had framed her. When asked how he could be so sure, Zeke couldn't reveal what he knew from his past life but insisted that Ain seemed kind. Suddenly, Zeke sensed something and looked behind. He started chasing after it, and went to an alley, asking someone why they were in such a dirty place. It turned out to be Ain, who was hiding. Zeke then took her to their inn and gave her a new set of clothes. Hans went out to buy dinner, and Zeke asked where the paladins had gone. Ain fell silent and started blaming herself. Zeke wondered if it had something to do with the wanted poster. Ain exclaimed she wasn't a witch, and Zeke reassured her that he knew. Ain wondered if he really believed her, and Zeke claimed he knew she wouldn't do something evil. He then asked Ain for details about what happened after they parted ways. Ain then shared how her talk with the respectable vice mayor, who had promised to address the issue, went better than with the greedy mayor. They were later invited to a dinner, and though Ain tried to decline, the paladins were visibly hungry. After they finished eating, they went to meet the mayor, only to find corpses in his room, the vice-mayor and his assistants. The paladins recognized the nearby statue of Valle emitting an evil aura. Ain realized that the mayor was under Valle's control, and he was surprised that she had just figured it out. When Ain asked about the mayor's actions, he exclaimed that he was sacrificing everyone to the great Valle. He then unleashed undead creatures to attack Ain, but a paladin stepped forward and slashed through the undead. The paladin activated a holy armor, revealing that they were outnumbered. Feeling she was only a hindrance, Ain witnessed another undead approaching for a surprise attack from behind. The other paladin pushed Ain out of the way, sacrificing themselves as they got bitten instead. Ain had stopped recalling what had happened. Zeke was curious if it was the Valle he knew, and Ain confirmed that it was the cult desiring destruction and chaos while worshipping the evil god Valle, continuing to commit murder and terrorism. Zeke wondered about their presence in the port, and Ain assumed they were conducting a ritual. She caught a quick glimpse of inscriptions on the mayor's Valle statue, indicating an offering of the city to Valle. Zeke grasped the situation, and Ain wondered if he had more information. Zeke explained that they set up Valle's statues around the city and offered the city's people as sacrifices. He thought the catalyst was the mayor's book he was holding. Ain mentioned her attempt to contact the temple, but the city was in lockdown. It was crucial to stop the ritual, and Zeke volunteered to help, considering it a good deed. Ain worried about Zeke's safety, but he reassured her and planned to go to the mayor's place the next night. As he left the room, he discovered Hans eavesdropping behind it. Zeke found it convenient that Hans came back and instructed him to do something. Hans was surprised by what he had just overheard. The night before, Zeke and Ain snuck into a mansion after overcoming some guards. They wandered around until they reached the mayor's room, where the statue of Valle was kept. Zeke opened the door, revealing the mayor inside. With Ain's confirmation that the mayor was the wrongdoer, Zeke swiftly drew his sword and pointed it at the mayor's neck. However, he sensed something wasn't right. Ain cautioned him about the possibility of the mayor summoning undead creatures. Despite the mayor's pleas of innocence, Zeke, skeptical, kicked him to the ground. As the mayor lay unconscious, an ominous aura emanated from his mouth, leaving Ain bewildered. The sinister energy dispersed toward the door, and Zeke declared that the true culprit had now revealed themselves. They were surprised to see the vice president, since they thought he had died along with the vice mayor. Ain then noticed the book he held, filled with Valle's energy. He corrected her, saying it was called the Key of the Sacrificial Ritual. Zeke now understood that the mayor had unwillingly followed someone's orders before dying. He was not a henchman but a puppet of the vice president. Ain couldn't believe such a revelation and asked about the paladins. The vice president then informed her that the paladins were well contained and became fish feed. Ain was devastated by such news. The vice president then inquired about Zeke and asked if he was related to Ain's affiliation. Zeke confirmed he was not. The vice president questioned, "Why Zeke?" and Zeke retorted that someone who reveres a fish should not know the reason, teasing him. The vice president wondered if Zeke wanted to receive Valle's punishment, but Zeke claimed he didn't want to be punished by a mere fish. Angered, the vice president swore to make Zeke repent in sheer pain before dying. He then cast something, and the undead suddenly appeared. He ordered them to kill Zeke and leave Ain alive. Ain then blessed Zeke, who immediately felt something in his mana-constricted heart. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he quickly moved to slash down the zombies with speed and accuracy. The vice president was shocked to witness his undead monsters taken down easily. Zeke had his mana flowing perfectly from his heart to his sword. His mana was back in the ball game. Zeke wondered if that was all and asked for more undead to slash down. The vice president called him arrogant, and exclaimed that they were late since the ritual preparations were done. Zeke claimed it was not, making the vice president confused. He claimed he already destroyed all the statues scattered around the port city. The vice president claimed it would be useless even if the statues were destroyed. Zeke then wondered if the ritual's strength would decrease if a cleric was involved. The vice president got pissed off. Ain wondered if Zeke was telling the truth. Zeke then explained that after destroying all the scattered statues in the city, the next step was to destroy the one with the inscriptions. Nervous, the vice president summoned more undead and ordered them to kill Zeke immediately. However, since he had regained his mana, Zeke easily cut down the undead into pieces, leaving the vice president speechless. Strangely, Ain blushed while watching Zeke smile and wield his sword. Zeke suddenly grabbed Ain and lifted her, asking her not to move too much. He said they would escape the area, but Ain exclaimed that the entrance was already blocked. Zeke then ran toward the window and broke the glass with his back. The vice president couldn't believe that the two just ran off like that. He smirked, getting an idea to revise his plans. The following morning, posters of a man were spread around, and news once again buzzed about Ain having killed the mayor. People who saw the posters and heard the news thought she was horrible. They pondered about the man on the poster, assuming he was one of the witch's henchmen. Damn, what is that glow down? Will Zeke and Ain get out of these allegations and defeat the cunning vice president? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button. Thanks for watching.